Ultimate Welding Glossary, 100 plus terms explained. Gary Pace, PE, Katy, Texas. This one, Introduction to Weld Joint and Geometry. So with weld joints and geometry, this is like its own little language. I suppose it's like any other profession. You've got your own language and there's some grammar that goes along with explaining it. You got rules and stuff. So we're going to explore the different types and configurations of some of the basics of weld joints and geometry. Butt joint. This is just when we put two pieces of material together, edge to edge, same plane. This is super common. We see this in piping, structural, and a lot of different other fabrication type situations. Lap joint. This is when we have two overlapping pieces of material and we weld it together. You're going to see this a lot with sheet metal and other thin material type situations. You're not going to see this with like 6-inch pieces of plate or something like that. It's not going to happen. A T-joint, this is just when we make a T. One piece of metal is perpendicular to another, forming a T. We use this a lot in all forms of construction, shipbuilding, structural, mechanical assemblies, frames for pieces of equipment, a lot of different ways. You get a good strong weld out of it when you join like this. Most common probably type of joint we're ever going to run across. Corner joint, this is where they're at 90 degrees. This is see in box containers or cabinet type situations, and framework for welding depending on what you're putting together. Edge joint, two pieces are put together parallel to each other, and then you're going to weld it along that common edge. This is a biggie in sheet metal. You're not going to see this generally in structural. I mean, you could, but it's not very common. Fillet welds. Now this is a fillet weld. Fillet weld is the most common kind of weld you're going to come across. It's a triangular shape, I guess, if you do a cross section of it. A lot less preparation, and you're going to get a good strong weld. And they use them for all kinds of different applications in structural and pressure vessels and all kinds of different places. So this is a groove weld. So a groove weld, we prepare the edges of the metal, and it's going to allow us for full penetration welding or partial penetration, depending on what we've got going on. Some of the more common types would be a V groove, a U groove, a J groove, and a bevel groove weld. There's a lot of different groove weld types, but just realize this is a groove weld. This is a bevel groove weld. When we bevel one side to improve the penetration, you're going to see this in pipe and heavy industrial structural fabrication type applications. A V groove weld. If you haven't figured it out by now, a lot of these are, named after like a letter that they look like. So this is a V groove. It's going to allow deep penetration. We can get full thickness welds with this one. Used in a lot of different applications, heavy duty applications. Very common weld preparation. So here we have a groove weld, and we've welded it out. So here's a little extra bonus vocabulary we'll throw in. And this is the types of passes that we generally have. So the root pass is going to be the first one, like the root of a tree. Then we're going to follow it up with what's known as a hot pass, where we just come right over the top of that one and put a little more metal in, strengthen up our weld, give it a little more structural integrity before we fill this thing out. Then we've got our fill passes. Our fill passes is anything generally after the hot pass and before we get to the cap pass. The cap pass is the final layer on this thing that is going to be exposed to the atmosphere or whatever material is on that surface. So whatever that surface is, those welds are called the cap pass. So we've got a root, hot, fill, and cap. And there might be other ways of calling this out, but this is generally the vernacular that I've come across. Groove welds, a weld made in a groove between the work pieces. And we've got 8 types of groove welds: square groove, scarf, V groove, bevel groove, U groove, J groove, flare groove, V groove, and a flare bevel groove. So this is a U groove. It's a rounded joint. It reduces the amount of filler metal because it's deeper and it's not as wide. We use this on thick plate welding. So this is a U groove. You look at it, you can see the U. That's why we call it a U groove. This is a J groove, similar to a U groove, but only half of it. Only one side has that curved preparation. The other side has a straight line preparation. And this is going to help reduce material removal. So if we don't want to have put a lot of weld back in, a lot of times a J groove is a really good joint configuration for achieving that end. This is a flare bevel groove, or flare bevel groove weld. This is when we join a rounded edge, like a pipe or a bar, to a flat surface. Tubing, structural applications like that. If you welded a round piece of tubing to a piece of flat bar, this would be a flare bevel groove weld. This is a flare V groove weld. So this is when we weld 2 rounded edges are joined together. This is typical in thin-walled pipe, and a lot of different applications where you could run into this stuff. Square groove weld. This is just where we don't have any edge preparation, and we just butt these things up and go. Generally, we see this in thin materials or some kind of automated welding situation where high efficiency is needed. You're generally not going to see this with like 8-inch pieces of plate or something. This is generally thinner materials. This is a plug weld. This would be where we'd want to weld 2 pieces together, one on top of the other. So then we'd cut a hole in the top piece and then puke a bunch of metal down into that hole that we just cut in there. I don't know, puke, but anyways, you get the picture. We would deposit a substantial amount of material into that weld preparation. This is a plug weld. Generally sheet metal and stuff. You're probably not going to see this on 9-inch pieces of plate or 4-inch pieces of plate. Slot weld. Instead of a slot, a hole, our holes are elongated, and it's a slot instead of a plug. Pretty much the same concept, just a little more elongated. Seam welding. This is a continuous weld along a joint, and they use this using a resistance welding equipment. Tanks, pipes, automotive applications, things like that. Seam weld. Backing weld and back welding. A back weld is applied to the reverse side of a joint for reinforcement, while a backing weld is deposited before the main weld to improve penetration and fusion. So with a back weld, we do the first side, we do our weld, and then we come in from the back side, we chew out a bunch of material, and then we put a weld bead back there. With a backing weld, A backing weld is just a weld, and then we put our second weld on top of that. So with a back weld, the back weld is done second, and a backing weld is done first. You can see from our diagram. All right. So if you're the designer, getting the weld joint and geometry, that's going to be pretty crucial for putting together whatever it is you're putting together. And in doing this, you're going to have to consider material thicknesses, load requirements, welding techniques to determine how you're going to build this thing. Like and subscribe. Check out some of the other videos I've put out over the last couple years. There's pretty much a Part A AWS CWI course out there, but give us a try. Hope you like it. If not, track me down and shoot me a question. Thanks. Have a nice day.